On August 30th, a gas pipeline was blown up in Moscow. What is going on? There have been bombings since this morning. It's like a real war, damn it.
Everything's gone to hell.
The railways have been extensively attacked, and numerous oil refineries are currently burning. Oh no.
They fucking blew up a peaceful factory. I work here, fuck, I just woke up because fuck, my job is going to shit.
So that's what's going on. It turns out that around 4 in the morning there were very loud banging noises.
The capital was engulfed in a fiery hell. Near Moscow, the railway was hit and fuel tanks are burning. A giant fuel station was destroyed in the Bryansk region.
You know, it's a complete fucking mess, right? I've already lost count of how many have lit up. 17th. I sent it. Already on.
17th. It's the 17th day now.
In Crimea, an S-400 radar complex was destroyed, and in the Sea of Azov, disaster struck. The Ukrainian armed forces blew up the Russian missile carrier Buyan-M. Everything is on fire.
There you go. It's flying, my friend.
August 30th, and sensational news. The Guar sank the Buyan-M missile carrier in the Sea of Azov. It was blown up in Crimea. The GUR Special Forces also eliminated the S-400 radar complex. We are striking railway junctions, military airfields, and bridges in occupied Crimea. And now Moscow and St. Petersburg are under heavy attack. Hundreds of Russian targets have been hit. Oil refineries are burning in the Samara region and Kuban. Explosions have destroyed ammunition depots, paralyzed key stations near Moscow, trains are burning, and military equipment convoys have been blown up. Boom, bada boom. Everything is on fire. The AFU struck a fuel station in the Bryansk region. The facility was pumping diesel for the Russian army. Its capacity is over 10 million tons per year. A massive fire is raging on the site. This is the Flamingo missile, with a range of 3,000 kilometers. It is already in serial production. In Ukraine, they say they are producing 1 missile per day. Russia is burning, and this is only the beginning. The Samara, Afipsky, and Kibyshev oil refineries are ablaze. We are destroying military logistics, the fuel and energy sector, military trains, railway hubs, and causing an aviation collapse on Russian territory. Let's discuss this escalation and the strikes on Russia with the well-known military analyst Roman Svitan.
Greetings, and I wish everyone good health.
Roman Grigorievich, let's start with the events in the Sea of Azov. The Gur fighter struck a Buyan-M class missile ship, a carrier of Caliber missiles. The vessel was forced to leave its combat duty. The floor is all yours.
It was a well-executed operation. Indeed, it was deep within enemy territory, over 100 kilometers at least from the front line. They approached directly, that is, with a guided drone. At the very least, you could see how it was approaching. This means there was control, one drone and another. In other words, they hit the ship with 2 drones and accomplished the combat mission. First, they struck the radar, blinded it, so to speak, and then they hit the hull. Naturally, it was put out of commission. The General Staff will confirm the extent of the damage soon, and the main intelligence directorate is already releasing information. We'll cover this topic in more detail in our upcoming episodes. But this is truly the very first time in the entire world, quite probably, at this unprecedented level of engagement, more precisely when an unmanned aerial vehicle, a drone, has successfully struck a formidable missile ship. Yes, it's a small missile ship, an MRK as they call it, of the Buyan class, but nevertheless, it's a missile carrier, which is very dangerous for us.
Roman Grigorievich, regarding our strikes on the oil refineries. At night, drones struck the Novorossiysk oil refinery in the Samara region and the Afipsky oil refinery in the Krasnodar region. The combined capacity of these plants is over 13 million tons of processing per year. That's almost 5% of all Russian oil refining. Losses for Russia in August alone amount to minus 21% of production. To what extent, in your opinion, do strikes on oil refineries undermine Russia's ability to wage war? We attack oil refineries almost every night.
We've been talking about this with you for at least a year. One of the ways, or perhaps the only way to defeat Russia, is to break it apart. The collapse of Russia is only possible after the destruction of its economy. And the Russian economy is based primarily on petrodollars, that is, on the Russian oil and gas sector. which brings in about a third of $1 trillion in revenue, meaning the Russian economy receives more than $300 billion from the oil and gas industry. And if in just 1 month we can take out a fifth of it, and what happened over this past month is that a fifth of Russia's oil refining capacity was eliminated, then it's very easy to calculate. By the end of the year, they won't have a single oil refinery left, especially those we can reach with the same flamingos. We're just waiting for them to show up. We've seen the videos, we've seen the announcements, but we haven't seen the missiles. And 3,000 kilometers is exactly the distance to the Omsk oil refinery, the largest in Russia, with an annual processing capacity of 21 million tons. So there's a real possibility to completely shut down the Russian economy over the next year. By the end of the year, the oil industry will be knocked out. Next year, Nabulina will have to start printing rubles. In a year, inflation will devour everything, and the Russian republics will simply break away and go their own way, just like what happened with the Soviet Union back in the day. That's why the actions currently being carried out by the armed forces of Ukraine, the Ukrainian army, will ultimately lead us to victory.
Roman Grigorievich regarding the Novokuybishevsk, Samara, and Fipis oil refineries. What kind of damage was done? How serious were the strikes? The floor is yours.
Well, there was a strike on both the Novokuybishevsk and Kuybyshev refineries. These are two oil refineries. They were hit at the very least. Some of the technological processes there were shut down. And there was a strike on the Fips refinery as well as on the Samara refinery. But if we look at the overall picture, about a dozen Russian oil refineries have been hit with varying degrees of damage. Some have completely shut down, like the Novokuybishevsk refinery, while others like the Ryazan refinery have halved their processing capacity on the remaining operational units and are trying to somehow reroute and process this oil within Russia. The Russians had to at least reduce shipments to these refineries, redirecting the oil elsewhere. Most of it was sent toward Novorossiysk. They tried to pump this surplus oil, so to speak, to Ust-Luga, but then, surprise, hello from Ukraine, the security service showed up and took out at least half of the oil transshipment capacity in the Ust-Luga area. So, out of 700,000 barrels per day, they are now transshipping 350,000 barrels, about the same as the Druzhba pipeline, which can pump around 300,000. In other words, there are mechanisms that, if set in motion, and I'll repeat, they must absolutely not be stopped. So it's necessary to keep going at least at the same pace, And by the end of the year, there will be a very big New Year's gift for Putin from Sechin.
As for the Bryansk region, there's information that the armed forces of Ukraine struck a fuel station in the Bryansk region. The facility was pumping diesel for the Russian army with a capacity of over 10 million tons per year. A fire has been reported at the site. Roman Grigorievich, how do you assess this strike, and how serious is it, the strike on the supply of troops? And can such attacks cause a fuel shortage at the front? The floor is yours.
This is indeed one of the primary line dispatcher stations, a crucial line dispatcher station that was actively operating and is specifically called LPDS-8N, so to speak, in this particular context. This is in the Unecha area. Before this, there was also a strike in the Unecha zone, so-called, that's the Unecha LPDS, but it's actually located in Visokoye, the village of Visokoye, southeast of Unecha itself. Unecha itself is, not a small settlement. And this station, LPDS-8N, which was hit today, is south of Unecha, but it's part of the same complex. In fact, it's used both for pumping oil, crude oil as such, and for operating as a product pipeline for pumping oil products, mainly diesel. Well, mostly diesel is pumped through it. It's a similar example, the same kind of situation as what was recently blown up, this kind of diesel transfer from Ryazan to Moscow. So literally just a few days ago, a very similar product pipeline was blown up, just like this one near LPDS-8N. This is systematic work by our forces, mainly by our drone systems. They're the ones mostly handling it. Although it could have been done by the ufologists or by the same special operations guys, it's not far, just 40 kilometers away. This station was struck several times, some time ago, using our ballistic missiles. Mainly, we diligently tried, it's approximately 40 kilometers from our national border. We meticulously tried to effectively hit it with our powerful ballistic missiles. I mean, specifically with our HIMARS systems, most likely utilizing M30 rockets, but unfortunately, the Russians successfully shot them down. 4 rockets were launched there, but they managed to shoot them all down. But this time, they couldn't do it. And you could say another oil pumping station, another one is out of commission. Our forces are working hard, and it's the right approach. The thing is, to completely stop, say, the Druzhba oil pipeline, it's not enough to destroy just one station, one oil pumping station. You need to take out 3 more nearby. In other words, 3 of them in a row need to be out of action. For example, there's this LPDS 8N and the next one near Mamayev. If that LPDS is also taken out, the Druzhba oil pipeline will come to a halt.
Roman Grigorievich, all these strikes, we've been talking about them for the past month, and it seems to me that August has been entirely dedicated to strikes on the Russian oil industry. Do you think these strikes will have any effect on Russia's political leadership, on military operations, or on the enemy's ability to advance into our territory?
Well, we've been talking about strikes on Unecha for several years now, right? The fact that we've only just started working on this location is another matter. Why didn't we work on it before? So apparently it took appointing Major Madiyar as the head of the drone systems forces for him to break those former so-called deals that our leadership had with the Russians, the Israelis, the Americans. It's unclear what those deals were. But for several years, we didn't strike, we didn't hit the oil industry. Whenever we started to strike, we would stop. Only now have we actually started. The main thing is not to stop. The result of working in this mode, if no one stops our strikes, at the beginning of the year, the Russians simply won't have any money to continue their military operations. They just won't. So Nabiulina will have to hang herself. Well, what else can she do? She already got the rope back in 2022. She bought it then. She wanted to hang herself, but they stopped her. At least they didn't let her kick the chair away. This time, though, they might just throw her out the window. Why? Because there simply won't be any money to buy recruits, equipment, ammunition, or parts and components from the Chinese. There just won't be any. So we'll see. The main thing, I'll say it again, is not to stop, because we've stopped twice before. Twice our generals were stopped. There's hope that no one will get to the major.
As for Tver, the infrastructure of a key railway junction was destroyed there. The explosion engulfed fuel tanks. The fire spread across the entire area. This is one of Russia's key transportation hubs. Again, in recent months, I'd even say this summer, we've been very actively striking railway junctions both in occupied Crimea and in Russian regions. The Moscow region, Rostov region. How do you assess these actions? Now there's another explosion burning brightly, fuel tanks blown up, military equipment convoys, and railway junctions. What do you think?
For at least 6 months, the Russians have been gathering reserves for the second wave of the summer military campaign, aiming to capture the Zaporizhzhia and Donetsk regions, at least the left bank, to expand the land corridor. They carried out these buildups mainly in the Urals region. Beyond the Urals, in other words, over a very large area, preparations for reserves were underway. And now these reserves have been moving for several weeks already, heading toward the line of contact from the Urals through Rostov, if we're talking about the southern route, through Rostov, approaching Rostov from the direction of Tver and from Volgograd. Well, in other words, there are certain routes there. Naturally, as soon as the opportunity arose, whether for informants of our intelligence services or for the intelligence services themselves or for concerned citizens, and we don't just mention concerned citizens for nothing, 200 grams of explosives placed under some barrel of gasoline or diesel, well, it'll blow it up and set it on fire like a torch, and then people can warm themselves up for free. And when there's a chance to warm up for free, half of Russia will show up. That's why we see this footage that these Russian freeloaders are posting online.
Roman Grigorievich, can we now talk about a systematic campaign against logistics? What consequences will this create for Russia right now? As a military analyst, what do you see for supplying Russian troops at the front?
We have no other choice. If we don't destroy Russian logistics, especially the railways, then all the Russian hardware they've accumulated over the past 6 months will end up on the front line. We will lose Donbas and we will lose Zaporizhzhia, well, the left bank for sure. So at this point, it's not about thriving, it's about surviving, as they say. Naturally, we're using various methods to reach, or at least try to reach, railway junctions, traction substations, and fuel trains, which can basically explode on their own if you just set them on fire the right way. And of course, equipment and ammunition that are being transported along the railway lines. If in the very near future, and there is indeed such a significant hope, literally within a couple of days, even during the release of our live streams over the upcoming weekend, our valiant forces will launch a decisive strike at Russian logistics with powerful heavy missiles. Why is there such hope specifically? The thing is, on August 31st and September 1st, a summit of the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the so-called union, is taking place in China, SCO related. So a pretty serious crowd is gathering there, leaders from Central Asia, some African countries, basically from Kazakhstan to Cuba. That is, everyone is more or less oriented toward China. They'll all gather there on the 31st and 1st, and Putin will be there too. So for us, it's very important that while he's setting foot on Chinese soil, we deliver a serious blow to Russian logistics, to the Russian oil industry. In other words, you don't even need to do it today. It's better to start tomorrow. So if we start working tomorrow night, that will already be tomorrow night, which essentially will be the beginning of Sunday in China. And precisely this 31st could catch Putin there. He simply won't have enough suitcases. He'll have to order at least a few hundred suitcases from Xi Jinping at one of the emergency factories. He won't just leave them there. He'll have to call in a couple more planes to bring all of Putin's stuff back to Moscow for sorting. So this strike would be just perfect timing. Again, both politically within Russia and geopolitically in the world. And for us, it's very important, first of all, to respond, let's put it mildly, with a little payback for the strike on Kyiv, for our children, for the lives that Putin's strike on Kyiv has already taken, almost 20 now. We definitely won't forget this. That's why it wouldn't be a bad idea to deliver such a payback strike, ideally, of course, on Moscow, and optimally, it's best to hit Moscow, Russian oil infrastructure, Crimea. In other words, there are plenty of targets, and I'll say it again, even if you do nothing for a day and a half, just gather more ammunition, more means of destruction, and hit them hard on Sunday or Monday so that, once again, Putin really starts to feel the heat. And you can keep working until the 3rd. On the 3rd, the Chinese will be trying to hold a military parade there, 80 years since the victory of the Chinese People's Army over the Japanese militarists at that time. So quite a large number of leaders will be gathering there as well. It wouldn't be a bad thing. Putin will stay there. He'll be in China for 4 days filling up his little suitcases, so let him fill them up properly. So from the 31st to the 3rd, Russia needs to be hit hard every single day from all sides. This effect will probably be the most powerful one this year. Moreover, both geopolitically and politically, it's the same.
Roman Grigorievich, you've raised a very important issue. Every time Putin carries out missile terror, kills Ukrainians, people always ask, why don't we strike Moscow and St. Petersburg military targets with Ukrainian missiles? We are not terrorists, absolutely, but so that their lives would turn into a situation where there is constant missile danger in Moscow and St. Petersburg, they are hiding in basements and we are striking military targets. This is the question my audience asks me every day. Where are our strikes on Moscow and St. Petersburg? Because they are the ones who should feel the war. Roman Grigorievich, I direct this question to you.
I answered this question a few months ago. I started answering it on different channels because I had a lot of questions myself. But the 12-story swearing that inevitably comes up when answering this question always gets bleeped out, and then there's really no point in answering it at all. Let's put it this way. 12-story military swearing. There simply aren't any other answers. Don't bleep it out. This time I won't swear. These 12-story curses are directed at our government, which has been in power for 7 years now, running a rocket-producing country that once made the SS-18 Satan. And in these 7 years, they haven't managed to make a single ballistic missile that could reach Moscow. Well, let's make it 13-story curses then. 13 is such a nice number for them. No more 12-story curses for the Orthodox. For them, it's 13-story curses. We'll cover them with 13-story curses. There's nothing else to do. There's no other option. There was a chance to replace the executive branch. It's clear that the executive branch is the one responsible for production as such, for financing, for setting tasks, and for production itself. There was an opportunity to replace it with people who are professionally competent. It was necessary to bring in military personnel with a certain background in production, including a sufficient number of people with basic military education who had proven themselves well in production. It was necessary to bring people into the executive branch, into the cabinet of ministers. In other words, Shmyhal could have been sent to the front, not to the Ministry of Defense. When I said Shmyhal should go to the front, I didn't mean into the army under the Ministry of Defense. But he was brought in, yes, as if he joined the army only as the Minister of Defense. That's the problem. And still, this mess has stayed exactly the same as it was. Maybe they just changed the sheets in the bed with the girls, or at most washed them, and even that's a big question. Because even washing them involves certain production and technological cycles, and they're just plain incapable of that. If a country that builds rockets couldn't make a rocket, well, what's so hard about it after all? But we have a lot of our own developments. The Sapsan project, for example, just needed to be funded at the right time and given a set of tactical and technical requirements for the missile, or at the very least, a production goal, and it would have been completed long ago, because we have no other option. There is only one possible way to ensure Ukraine's security. That is to respond with ballistic strikes on Moscow. Wherever they strike in Ukraine, we must hit Moscow, hit military targets. Why Moscow? Because 30% of Russia's military technological expertise is concentrated in Moscow. There, naturally, everything from design bureaus to the main technological production facilities is located, including even Dubna, just north of Moscow, more than 100 kilometers away. But there is a nuclear research center there. That's exactly where we need to strike immediately. And if our ballistic missiles start flying there, the Russians will stop striking Ukraine. Well, it's like Pavlov's dog. You have to break the reflex. If they so much as glance sideways at Ukraine, 10 ballistic missiles should hit the Kremlin. If they look sideways a second time with the other eye, another 10 missiles should be launched. That's the way you have to train a Russian, like Pavlov's dog, until it becomes a reflex. Bring them to that state of reflexive response, so to speak, to any pressure directed at Ukraine. There are no other options. We can't cover our entire country with air defense missile systems. Our country covers 600,000 square kilometers. Even if a little over 100 are occupied by the Russians, it's still 500,000, or rather 500,000 square kilometers that simply can't be covered by air defense systems. Only a mirror strike is possible. That's why there's so much swearing directed at the authorities. There's no other way to react, so to speak.
Friends, let us know in the comments what you think about this. Give this video a like and support our tandem with Roman Grigorievich. Roman Grigorievich always raises very sharp and important issues as a great patriot of our country and talks about very significant matters. So please write words of support in the comments. What do you think? Undoubtedly, this is very valuable. And please let us know where you're watching from. Share your location in the comments. Roman Grigorievich, let's return to Crimea. In Crimea, GUR Special Forces destroyed the 91 and 60 radar complex, the eyes of the S-400 Triumph system. And the loss of such a complex significantly reduces Russia's air defense capabilities. We keep talking about how we're striking missile defense and air defense systems in Crimea, destroying them. Are we preparing for some serious actions in the occupied territory of Crimea?
Well, not only that. The thing is, if we broaden the scope a bit, the GUR is working directly on certain targets in Crimea, including some sections of the front, and the security service is also working in tandem. If we talk about the work of the SBU and GUR, over the past week and a half to 2 weeks, they've been targeting the eyes of Russia's radio technical troops. That means the radars. Radars, in other words, mechanisms, have likely been developed to determine the locations of Russian radars, and they're trying to blind the enemy's air defense. Because without radars, the missiles won't know where to go. And this means that since we can see systematic preparation, this is truly systematic planned work. At least, judging by the locations being targeted, the actions are roughly the same as those taken before gaining air superiority in a war. I do not rule out the possibility that this is preparation for our missiles to strike military targets in Crimea, up to and including the Kerch Bridge, as well as serious military targets in the enemy's rear along the route passing through Crimea. Such a possibility exists, and that means Novorossiysk. That is based on an understanding of the processes, meaning Crimea, Novorossiysk, nearby Sochi, in other words, that area, the Krasnodar region, toward the Caucasus. Most likely, certain serious strikes are being prepared there. And I do not rule out the possibility that this will happen on the 31st or the 1st, August 31st or September 1st. Why? Because geopolitically, that would be very significant. Or perhaps on the 3rd to finish it off, at the very least, so that Xi Jinping too would have the image of the Kerch Bridge lying on its side right before his eyes, evoking certain associations. In other words, preparations are underway from an aviation standpoint. I can say that this preparation is visible, and moreover, the special services are working extremely well. They are simply doing an outstanding job assisting the pilots.
Roman Grigorievich, we keep talking about how Novorossiysk should be another major target for our defense forces. What do you think?
Novorossiysk represents 2 targets for us. Novorossiysk, 2 bases. The Novorossiysk base of the Black Sea Fleet, the new one so-called, since they moved from Sevastopol to Novorossiysk. The entire Black Sea Fleet can't actually fit there. It's like a crowded bathhouse where there's nowhere to squeeze in if there are too many people. It's exactly the same situation here. Only a third of the fleet can enter the bay, while the other 2/3 are left anchored outside. So they do have problems, specifically a lack of capacity at this base. What I'm saying is there's a serious concentration of Russian ships there. They're trying to cover themselves with coastal defenses, that is, coastal air defense systems, trying to use them to protect the ships as well, because in fact, the main ship that used to provide air defense for the Russian fleet, we sank back in 2022. Big regards to the cruiser. What was it called again? That ship, the Moskva. It was the one carrying the air defense system, but it couldn't hold out 2 Neptunes and it sank. So for us, What's important is the base itself, of course, the technological processes at that base, especially the size systems, the special engineering service that prepares and loads the missiles. They're already loading not just ships, but also submarines with those same caliber missiles. So what's important? And secondly, the second target in the Novorossiysk area is the Russian oil transshipment facility. They're serious there. They can transship over 1 million tons of oil per day through the oil terminals near the Novorossiysk base. That's why these two targets definitely need to be taken out. And this would be a double blow. First to the Black Sea Fleet, and second to the Russian economy by destroying one of the pipelines through which, among other things, Russian oil is pumped. Kazakh oil is pumped through it, so-called, although by the time it gets there, it basically becomes American. That's why the Americans might get involved here, although most of their passports are actually Israeli. And since they're Israeli, that means it's fair game.
Roman Grigorievich, there have been two events related to China that I would like you to comment on. First, Chinese television has started showing truthful reports, according to analysts. This is what Saplienko is reporting on, how Russian drones are striking residential neighborhoods in Ukraine and killing civilians, and how the Ukrainian armed forces and the GUR are attacking Russian ships. Moreover, for the first time in history, as everyone has written, Xi Jinping congratulated Ukraine on its Independence Day. Does this mean that China, as a beneficiary of this war, might decide to bring it to an end? What do you think in terms of these kinds of signals?
Well, China is definitely behind Russia. That's 100% certain. And in fact, it was the Chinese who started all this. What is Russia really? For China, Russia is like a rabid dog that its Chinese master directs wherever he wants. In 2022, Xi Jinping decided to attack Europe, and with a magic kick, he sent Putin, who ran off to bite Ukraine. Well, that's more or less how it looks. Naturally, when the master realizes that they might come for him next, he can pull the dog back, stop it, or simply shoot it. For the Chinese, taking out Russia would be as easy as 1, 2, 3, so to speak. That is, they can easily do this because about 70% of the Russian economy and military depend on Chinese purchases of oil and Russian gas, including together with India, and also on supplies of Chinese military equipment, components, and assemblies for those same long-range strike systems. That's why the Chinese can definitely stop Russia. The question is, will Russia actually stop? I mean, how will they react? I think they will stop, because right now Putin is up to his ears in Xi Jinping, and besides, he might even try to hide somewhere in his folds of fat. That's why I think there's a possibility that the Chinese are preparing, including preparing their own electorate. They have 1.5 billion people over there. They need to show why, for example, Xi Jinping might somehow get involved in this process, in stopping certain things, or at the very least, stopping China's own involvement in this process. I don't rule out the possibility that this will be yet another smokescreen, just more window dressing from Xi Jinping. After all, this is China. They've been living there for millennia, taking step after step. It's an ancient civilization, and since they've lived so long, they've learned to be cunning. They've learned to deceive. That's precisely why, if there's anyone in this world I absolutely wouldn't trust, it's certainly the Chinese. Well, right after the Israelis, of course, naturally.
Roman Grigorievich, the Flamingo missile with a range of 3,000 kilometers, is already in serial production in Ukraine, according to The Economist. The publication reports that they are producing 1 missile per day. The floor is yours.
Well, so far, apart from announcements and videos, we haven't seen anything else yet. If they're producing 1 missile a day, then at least launch 1 missile at Russia so that this 1-ton warhead hits somewhere at a distance of 3,000 kilometers. We've already talked about the Omsk oil refinery, the Omsk petroleum processing plant. Even if just 1 missile with a 1-ton warhead reaches there, it's 3,000 kilometers or even less. The Omsk oil refinery would simply cease to exist. Second, as we've already mentioned, is target designation. It's called the Yamal Cross. 17 gas pipelines converge at a single point. Basically, all the gas that goes both to Russia and from Russia, it all comes from that Yamal direction. Surgut, Urengoy, all of it, Urengoy, Pomari, Uzhgorod, the pipeline that passes through us, it all practically starts there at this Yamal Cross. So it's also about 3,000 kilometers to there. In other words, the Flamingo can reach there as well. So from the perspective of how this information is being presented, well, it already causes a bit of ideological aversion. It's honestly even painful to listen to these messages. It would be better to just launch a missile, otherwise you'll be sent the way of the Russian warship. That's for all those announcers and their little announcements, who, to be honest, are already getting on everyone's nerves with their teasers and videos.
Friends, please like this video. Write a few kind words in the comments to support our tandem. Roman Grigorievich and I work 3 times a week. We release content much more often, and we always discuss all the latest military and political events, the latest news. The Kuibyshev oil refinery in Samara has halted operations after a drone attack, according to media reports. Roman Grigorievich, thank you, and as usual, see you on Monday. We will be discussing the SCO summit and Putin's meeting with Xi Jinping in China and its consequences. The well-known military analyst Roman Svitan. Roman Grigorievich, thank you, and see you on Monday.
Goodbye.